Hello, it's Danny Borris again, and we're going to record video number 9 in the series on my collection, the Daniel Borris collection, which incorporates the War Games collection of Donald Featherstone. So this time we're looking at the various frames, and this first one is Tony Bath's figures. All flats. Tony was a famous war gamer for the Hyboria campaign and the Society of Ancients way back. Every figure, of course, is antique. These figures were painted individually by Tony Bath. The next frame is Donald Featherstone's ancient wargaming collection. He has Huns, he has Scythian horse archers, and he has Carthaginian infantry. He wargamed with many different armies, but he favoured Carthaginian, and the collection shows that, although clearly, because of the mixture of cavalry that he used, he fielded various different types of army groups. The next frame is my own, Daniel Borris's ancient armies. I wargamed all different periods too, but my ancient wargaming was done largely in the ancient period with the Society of Ancients. I did some Napoleonic stuff too, but this is my ancient army, made up of Hinchcliffe figures, warrior miniatures, Julian Benassis, Greek hoplites and Scythian archers. Each of these frames averages about 700 figures. The next frame is Donald Featherstone's English Civil War army. These are the Cavaliers, the Royalists, the Highlanders at the back. The Scottish soldiers fought on both sides during the English Civil War, which you would expect of us. We were a little bit like that. We would fight each other as much as the enemy, I'm afraid. We've got the cavalry here, Prince Rupert's cavalry, and of course the pikemen, and the musketeers, the artillery in front of that. And facing them, we have the parliamentarians, the royalists. Sorry, the parliamentarians, that largely known as the Roundheads. They were led, of course, by Oliver Cromwell. And again, it's pike and shot, so there's some artillery, there's a pikeman, there's infantry. A lot of old minifigs here, very old minifigs, and hint and hunt, etc. Then there's some of what may be termed newer minifigs, but even those are antique. And more armoured heavy cavalry here still. The next frame is one of 3 of Donald's French Napoleonics. A lot of very old figures. It tend to be minifigs, Hinchcliffe. Some figures, I'm afraid, I have no idea who produced them, but there are hints and hunts. Les Higgins figures, which were always very delicate. They pop up in Donald's collections also. Facing the French in this case, we have the Austrian and Russian armies. Once again, Donald's, of course, and we see masses of Russian infantry, Austrians out in front as skirmishers, and then there's masses of Austrians, both artillery and infantry. Lots of these are the oldest minifigs. Behind we have Austrian cavalry, lancers and hussars. And behind that, next to that we have Russian cavalry, tend to be heavy dragoons. The next frame is another French frame. This would be the Old Guard. This is where we see the Emperor. Right now it's the Polish Lancers and the Dutch Lancers of the Guard. And then in the command group we see the Mameluke squadron in front, and we see Donald's personality figure of Napoleon surrounded by some of his staff and protected by dragoons of the Guard on foot. And over this side we have Chasseurs et Cheval of the Guard, and we have some dragoons of the Guard. The infantry, of course, are the Old Guard, the Middle Guard, the Young Guard. And there's some line infantry here and there backing them up. There's some Marines of the Guard here up front, and Guard artillery. Facing this frame, we have a British frame where the allies that we see in it tend to be the Black Brunswickers, so from around the Waterloo period. Riflemen out front, Highlanders behind that, and line infantry behind that again. Artillery at the very foremost of the frame. You see a fair amount of Les Higgins figures here, but there's also some Staden 30mm in this frame, the Highlanders. And we see some cavalry, heavy dragoons generally speaking. There's some garrison figures here as well as the minifigs. And over this side we see a lot of Black Brunswicker Lancers. In this next frame again, it's French. The cavalry here are what would probably term demi-ronde-bosse. They're half round, and those are hussars. And here are the cuirassiers. They tend to be 30mm, Donald's figures. And then in front of that we have, by that I mean Donald's cavalry are often, or at least frequently, are 30mm figures. In front of that we have masses of what we call new minifigs, but as I said earlier, even those are antique figures. And the artillery out front. Facing them, this time we have the Brits, a little more as you would have seen them in the peninsula. Their allies tend to be various different Spanish and Portuguese regiments. Rifles out front, infantry behind, line infantry, sometimes the Brits interspersed with the Portuguese and the Spanish. Some garrison infantry again. And then behind that we see the cavalry. I think a fair amount of this cavalry is actually Les Higgins. They're very delicate. A lot of light dragoons. And over here we have heavy cavalry, heavy dragoons. Now I have two more of Donald's frames to visit at the other side of the room, and I have 5 minutes to do it in, as videos, I'm afraid, for YouTube are only allowed to run 15 minutes, so if I seem a little hasty, my sincere apologies. This frame is Donald's Colonials. Now, all I bought from Donald from a colonial perspective was the figures from around the Crimea campaign. You see line infantry, guards with their bearskins out in the field, sometimes bearing packs, sometimes in greatcoats, and there is Highlanders. Facing them is hosts of Germanic riflemen, two ranks of them, various types, and behind that we see the Boers. A lot of these Boers, I believe, are SAE, South African Engineer figures. Certainly this group of infantry in the middle. I suspect also that some of the cavalry are Staden or Surin Surin Willie figures. Now, in the middle here we have an American Civil War diorama. That's just something I put together some years ago, but it's worth the glance. It represents Chancellorsville, which, as they say, was a disaster in victory. Pretty crowded diorama, and it was fun putting it together. And finally, before we run out of time, we have a frame that is Donald's French Colonials. And there's all sorts here, all sorts of different cavalry regiments. And then there's Marines, French Marines. There's Turcos, troops from the French Empire, Algeria, etc. And then we have a whole bunch of the Foreign Legion outside this building and in front of it, and some Spahi cavalry and other French cavalry. Behind them, some French grenadiers from the Crimea, the first two ranks there, Foreign Legion behind them, and again a bunch of African, Algerian, Egyptian infantry, some of them I believe home cast. And that is the 9th visit to the collection. And as I suggested at the end of the 8th video, these figures are in fact for sale to the right dedicated buyers. If there are anyone who is interested, please contact me at my email address, Daniel Borris at yahoo.ca, and I'll be pleased to enter into discussions. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye.